Welcome back, everyone, to the Mindset Medicine Podcast. I'm Catherine Lucadu, and I'm really glad you're with me today. I'm still getting used to looking at the screen when I'm doing a podcast because for 2 years I just recorded into a microphone, but you can actually watch me and listen to me while I do these episodes now. So, you know what? Moving out of our comfort zone is always really important, and we're going to be talking about that today. It's going to be one of the few topics that we're going to talk about, but here is the main topic for today. What is holding you back? I find that we can get into these little ruts during the year where there's just the ideas aren't flowing. Have you had that happen? You're trying to think of something new, or you just feel like there's just this fog and you really wish you could get past it, but there's something holding you back and you can't figure out what it is. So I'm actually going to help fill in those gaps for you today. And it's actually called the imagination gap. And we do get these gaps of imagination when we are going through a few different things in life, or we begin to feel overwhelmed by everything happening around us. So I've got loads of notes here. So we are going to uncover the obstacles that prevent us from really taking on our full creative potential in this world. I'm going to give you 5 strategies that will help reignite your imagination. Albert Einstein once said that imagination is more important than knowledge because it is through our imagination that we can reinvent ourselves. We can actually invent products, technologies. I mean, isn't that where AI came from? Someone's imagination, where they were sitting around and they said to someone, "Can you imagine if?" And then that is where that brainstorming begins to happen. So, when was the last time you allowed yourself to be imaginative and you said to yourself, "Can you imagine if," and then you filled in that blank for yourself? But here's what happens: the fear of failure, the fear of society's expectations of us, self doubt, lack of confidence, all of that comes into the picture, and it really interrupts our flow of ideas and our imagination. I was thinking about this. So I knew I wanted to talk about this today. And, we're in the shower, we're going for a walk, or I'm working out in the morning. And I try and think, what is the best approach for this? Maybe it's just telling a couple of stories. So here's something that I remembered. I have been the most creative and imaginative in my life when I had the least amount of money in my pocket and in my bank account. Because what happens? You have to become imaginative. You have to become really creative when you have a lack of money, because things still need to get done. And if you have kids, you still need to keep them occupied, whether it's summertime, whether it was Christmas holidays. So here are some of the things that I have done over the years when I did not have a lot of money and I was not unhappy. I was living in Europe, and I would say Europe was a very, very challenging life experience. Let me put it that way, because it wasn't easy. It was a hard time for the 16 years I was there. It was tough. It was always swimming against the current. So here's what happened. I was working as a teacher, and over there, they did not pay us in the summers. So as a teacher, a lot of people think, oh, teachers have such a cushy job because they get paid all year, they get their summers off, and so on. Well, that was not the case in Europe. So we would finish school beginning of June, and we would be going back in September. So here I had basically about a half a month in June, all of July, all of August. Now, we're talking, it is hot. I mean, it's so hot there. It would go, if we were talking Celsius, we're going 40, 45, maybe 48 degrees Celsius, which I know is probably over 110 Fahrenheit. So it was warm. So here I had to, every summer for 16 years, figure out what I was going to do because I did not have the luxury of just going on unemployment because they only paid 60% of your salary. So I needed to find ways to make up a full time salary. I had two children, I was married, but it was very expensive living on a Mediterranean island. Everything is imported. So when we're talking about groceries, other than what's grown locally, there wasn't even beef. Beef was very, very expensive. So we never ate beef. So definitely a different way of living. Utility bills were high, all of that. So every year, it was my challenge to figure out, okay, how am I making money this summer? And 2 summers in a row, I got a job teaching Russian children English in a seaside town resort. Now, that was very interesting because they actually had absolutely no knowledge of English. So here you have this wonderful classroom of kids whose parents, who are very wealthy, have dropped them off in Cyprus on this seaside town, and they are expected to come to my class and learn English for most of the day. So that was a really interesting experience. I learned a little bit of Russian because that's what happens when you are interacting with people who don't, you're both not speaking the same language. It was very rewarding. It was a great opportunity for me to move out of my comfort zone, teach a group of kids who actually had no knowledge of English. I had no knowledge of Russian. So a lot of sign language goes on, a lot of drawing of pictures on the board, but we got through it. And, it's really not a bad gig to be teaching English right by the Mediterranean Sea, and the beach was there. I would take them out and, we'd talk about beach and vocabulary and things like that. So that was a really great experience. Another one that I had, and this is a funny one actually, is there was an ad I found, and they were looking for a female who had a Canadian or American accent. And of course, when you're in Europe, that's a big draw. So I had the Canadian accent, and they basically said, "We're going to call you for an interview." And I thought, okay, that's fine. So I get this phone call, and the person says, "Well, actually, the only thing we need you to do is we need you to say the words um, B4, I, whatever, 18, N, whatever, bingo." And so I had to do this like it was a voice test. So call out these numbers, BINGO. And if I passed the interview, I was then going to go to another seaside town where they had a studio, and I was going to record bingo numbers into a microphone that were going to be used for online gaming. I mean, crazy. But for about 5 hours work, I think I made about €1,000, which I guess in Canadian dollars, maybe $1,600. So, you know, this is what creativity is. It's your imagination, and your imagination becomes wild and works in overdrive when it has to. And I feel that when you get to the point of discomfort, that is when you will take full advantage of your imagination. But if you are in a very comfortable situation, if you are, sitting around and you're just wondering, I don't know what I should do next, it's not going to come to you. You need to feel the pull. You need to feel a little pressure. Isn't that how they make diamonds, right? Diamonds require pressure to become diamonds out of coal. We are the same way. Sometimes our best ideas, our imagination are when we have a constraint of some kind and we need to move forward out of necessity. And then the ideas start to come to us. So, a couple of little stories there that I thought I would start us off with. Now, one of the other things that will stifle our imagination, an obstacle for us, is societal expectations. And Why is that? Because really, human nature is wanting to be accepted. We want people to approve of our behavior. We want them to approve of our choices, which is why we can hold down, I guess you could say a professional job because we flow with the status quo. So, how can you move outside of that a little bit so that you can get your imagination flowing again? Because if all you're doing is going with the status flow in life and just following the rules, just doing what you've got to do, no more, no less, that will never stimulate your ideas. It will never stimulate you moving past that comfort zone into that new territory where amazing opportunities may be waiting for you. We also worry about criticism, don't we? Well, if I do that which is out of the norm, people will think this of me and so on. Steve Jobs didn't have this problem. He was okay going against the norm, the status quo, when he wanted to create the first computer. And then he went on to create his MacBook and the iPhone. And then, there forward, we have J.K. Rowling. She was turned down for her books on Harry Potter for about 10 years. She just kept getting, no, thank you. No, thank you. No, we don't find this story interesting, over and over and over. But she kept going. Vincent van Gogh. Do you know that for the majority of his life, people did not appreciate his art? They felt that he was unconventional. They felt that he was just too much for what society wanted and expected. But he kept going. What are some of the other obstacles that we have for this imagination gap and what holds us back from having these really great, wonderful ideas? So, one of the other obstacles is a lack of inspiration. When we go through life passively, meaning we do what we need to do, we come home, we watch Netflix, we're on the computer, all of that is intaking information passively, and it will not stimulate your imagination. So here's what I would like you to do. Try exposing yourself to new experiences. Try a food that you've always said, oh my gosh, I would never eat that. But you say that because you've never actually eaten it. Rather than making assumptions based on maybe what other people have told you were their feelings about a place, a thing, a person, I'd like you to go ahead and try something that is completely out of the norm for you to do. See what happens. Feel the discomfort, but embrace it. Traveling anywhere, traveling, even if it's to another city within your area, another town, a town you have never explored, do it. Just drive in a different direction that you've never driven before and see what you can find. See how you feel. Read. If you cannot travel, read. Grab books about countries, about cities abroad, and just start filling your mind with different ideas than what you have been living in. Because, and I use the word in, because we do live in a bubble. And we get used to this bubble that we live in because it's comfortable. But the only way you can get back to who you really are. I mean, can you remember as a child? Do you remember as a child? We did not have the video games. I mean, I think I had a video game when I was, I don't know, maybe 12 is when they came in. But get back to the point where look at kids when they're playing make believe and they're pretending things. This is the imagination at its finest. What happened What happened is that people asked us to grow up, but we can still go back and capture that. And I think we need to do more of that. And I think if we did more of that, we would feel happier. A lot of people who are in the creative arts industry or, writers, singers, musicians, painters, sculptors, anyone who is in the arts, you will see that they have this freedom within themselves. They flow better in life, I believe, than people who are always following the same rules, regulations, routine, and so on. Of course, this is my opinion, but it's my podcast. So I'm going to give you my opinion. But I do believe that the more we expand outside of our circle, outside of our bubble, that is when you get to experience so much more. Although living abroad was a challenging experience, I would never, ever take it away. I would do it again. When people say, "Would you do that again?" I absolutely would, because I got to meet people from all over the world. I got to meet people of every culture. I got to learn to understand people's accents. I am able to read and decipher the chicken scratch of people's handwriting who've come from countries all over the world if it's written in English. I myself had to teach myself Greek because I wasn't taught that when I lived here in Canada. All of these things, I was pushed out of my comfort zone on a daily basis because everything was new. The people were new, the places were new. I had to learn to drive on the other side of the road in a manual stick shift car. So not only am I not driving on the side of the road that I'm used to, but I'm also driving a stick shift in an old car. I mean, when I think back, it's amazing. Gas stoves. We didn't have gas stoves here in Toronto when I left. Everything was electric. As soon as I got there, everything, and not only a gas stovetop, but the oven had to be lit with a match. Now that I'm sitting here, I myself am having revelations, because I'm remembering all of these different things that I had to go through. But I'll tell you, I was never bored. And I was never at a loss for new ideas because my mind was always working ahead. I was always thinking of, oh, well, that's interesting. And then relating it to the way I grew up, but then seeing how there's a different way of life. And that way of life is okay too. It's actually not just what I believe and the stories that are in my mind. This is what it does when your imagination expands. You are no longer held back by stories that you have created, either from growing up, from what other people say, because you have been exposed to so many new ideas, ideologies, ways of living. Now, all of a sudden, your ideas expand and you also become more accepting and less judgmental of other people. I may be one of the least judgmental people out there because I have experienced so many different people, cultures, things, places, and so on, that I no longer think just because I think something, it's correct. I will always do research and I will always remain curious to find out more because I have learned that just because I think something or I have a belief doesn't necessarily mean it's true. It's just simply what my experience has been that far in life. But as we continue through life and we gain more experiences, if we allow ourselves to, and we remain curious, that is where we become, I believe, a very well rounded person. So let's keep going. Self-doubt. And again, this has to do with what I just talked about is the story that we tell ourselves. It's a story in our mind that has been created. I find that when you feel the most self doubt, it is because you are lacking confidence, which also means lacking experience. So, the way to overcome self doubt is to start experiencing more. Experience more in life. Stop going to the same place for holidays. Stop going to the same restaurants. Don't go to the same supermarket this week. Go to somewhere else. Start feeling new things because when you do, it sparks something in your brain. A little flame starts to get a little bit bigger. And that one new thing then turns into something else and it begins to compound. The next one are time constraints and distraction. Now, why would time constraint and distraction hold us back from being more creative in life? Well, because it takes time to think of new ideas. Our mind has to be at ease and relaxed in order to allow it to be creative. Isn't that why some of the most amazing ideas, or maybe business ventures or strategies that you've implemented in your life, have either been when you were going for a walk, when you're having a shower, maybe you're in the bath, um, lying in bed when it's quiet? I mean, isn't that when the mind starts going into overdrive? Because the rest of the world has quieted down. And now you have time to think. Now, it is interesting that I have noticed that there are some people that they're afraid to be alone with their thoughts because they worry about the thoughts that they're thinking. What's going to come up? How am I going to feel? Well, I don't want to think about that thing. I would say, don't be afraid of being with yourself. Don't be afraid of being alone with yourself because it is the first step to embracing who you are. It is the first step to becoming self aware. And when you can embrace who you are, when you can become self aware of your feelings and your thoughts, that is your next step to creativity. It is very difficult to be creative if you are not being true to yourself. I believe that we also need a lack of distraction because distraction actually takes away our time. And we need time to come up with ideas. We need time to have conversations with people because having conversations with people actually sparks our creativity. Have you ever been in a conversation, you're having a coffee with someone, and as you're sitting there, you think, oh my God, say that again? What was that thing you just said? And they say, and you're like, yes, that's it. I can't tell you how many times I have been to, these very high level masterminds, paid a lot of money to go to them, or I've been speaking, at different places or brokerages or whatnot, and you were thinking about a challenge that you have, or you're talking to someone who they run a team differently, whatever the case is, or they run a business and you really admire the model of that business. So, you leave the conference hall, go out into the hallways to go and grab a coffee, and then you just start talking to someone. And as you're talking, you're like, yeah, that's it. That's the next idea. Or you're having lunch or dinner. I actually joke that I should go away to masterminds more often, not to attend the mastermind, but just to have coffees, lunches, and dinners with people, because that is when my best ideas have been thought of and implemented in my business. Even starting video so early, it was in conversations with people that I realized that there was this very large gap in the way that real estate was being marketed. And that's why I started 8 years ago doing video on social media, because there was a gap of information that was being brought out. I remember when I started wanting to become the local market expert. I specifically remember I was sitting at home and I said to myself, Here's the problem. The problem is that people throw out postcards. How do I bypass the mailbox and go straight to their phones, go straight to where they are? How do I go into the living room, bypassing the mailbox? And it was through social media and video. So sometimes what some of the best ideas that you can come up with is think of what the problem is. What is the problem? Now, how do I bypass it? How do I solve that problem? Another way, another challenge that stifles our creativity is not having enough resources. And that really goes back to where I started this conversation, which was the story of me not having any money. And when you have a lack of resources, you have to become very creative. And so I think it's important that you remain determined to find creative solutions for your barriers. Ask yourself, where are my gaps? Where are the gaps in my business? Where are the gaps in whatever it is that you feel like something isn't moving forward? What is that gap? And then start saying to yourself, now, how do I fill it? What are the different ways? When you start planting the seeds in your mind that you want to answer a question or a problem, what's going to happen is things will begin to show up. It's just how the universe works. You know, energy flows where your focus is. So if you start focusing on solving a problem, what happens is you begin to notice different solutions to problems. This is creativity. But the creativity doesn't get sparked until you start questioning things, until you start to become curious about what is around you. And let's go to the last point. So we have rigid thinking. So, what is rigid thinking? Well, that's called a fixed mindset. It's a stubbornness that whatever you think is right, whatever you think is the truth, when in fact it is not. It is a story, it is your beliefs from just past experiences. But what if your past experiences are limited? What if there are other ways of doing things? What if there is another way of looking at that particular issue? One thing that I really concentrate on when I coach business owners, clients, entrepreneurs is shifting perspective because people can get slowed down, held back when they believe that their beliefs are correct. So, linear thinking means that there is no room for growth. And if there is no room for growth, then you will always be at a standstill. Let's look in an example of society, right? So, making cannabis legal. I know that this was something that no one thought would ever happen over here in Canada, but it did. It is now legal through certain dispensaries. Those dispensaries are now multiplying, and there are probably more cannabis dispensaries than there are convenience stores that used to be on every corner. This is a shift in perspective because it's something that so many people never thought would happen. AI, artificial intelligence, it's always been out there as an idea. And, these very large tech companies were working on it, but we never really expected that it would be enveloped into our actual lives now. Think about Siri on your phone. Think about when you say, "Hey, Google," and you ask a question. I mean, how incredible is that? What about mobile phones? Think of when you were, maybe I'm just dating myself, but think about when you were a child and, we had, the long telephone cord that you would pull around and try and close the door of your room. and talk on the phone. Now they're nowhere to be found. Everything is a cell phone. I got rid of my home phone. It's only a cell phone now. If we can keep our mind open and embrace rather than judge new things that are always going to be uncovered and invented and developed, if you can remain open minded, that is your key from holding yourself back. So, to wrap up, let's dive into 5 strategies that will help you rediscover your imagination. So, number 1 is the exact opposite of what I was just talking about. Develop a growth mindset. Believe in your ability to grow through dedication, through hard work, through reading, through being curious. Be so curious that you are willing to learn 10% of new things every day. 10%. Every day for the next 30 days, you say to yourself, what new thing am I going to try today? What new place am I going to go? What new thing am I going to read? And when I say new, I mean go way out there. Like, if you have never learned about mushrooms, read an article on mushrooms. I know, totally out there example, but that's my point. If there is something that you have never been interested in, go out and read an article about it. Just learn something new, because what that does is it starts to spark the curiosity of imagination. Number 2, embrace creative hobbies. Try and start something, even if it's just at home. Draw, paint, cook, anything, dancing, anything that you don't normally do. Maybe it's exercising, an exercise that you wouldn't normally do. Maybe it's yoga, maybe it's meditation. I don't know what that is for you, but embrace a creative hobby. Maybe it's gardening. Maybe you've always seen people gardening, but you yourself have never done it. I would say something that has slightly piqued your curiosity at some point in your life. Go back and just try it. Just give it a try. The next one is participating in brainstorming sessions. Grab a friend, someone who you trust, someone who you believe has different ideas from you, who has different points of view, and brainstorm with them. Don't brainstorm with people who are like-minded. Try brainstorming with people who have different ideas and ideologies from you, because what's going to happen is when a topic comes up, you're each going to have your own opinion. Don't be swayed by their opinion. Just listen to it. And it may open up a new portal in your mind that there is the realm of possibility that there are other ideas out there that could also be correct. Surround yourself with inspiration. That's strategy number 4. What does that mean? It means listen to podcasts that are inspirational to you. Read books, read biographies, read science, read about experiments that have been done, research findings, TEDx talks. Really try and expand where you gain your knowledge from. Because when you expose yourself to new authors, new types of writing, maybe you've never read poetry, start reading poetry. Maybe you've never opened the Bible to actually read through it. Read a couple of pages. Every time you decide to open up that door to something new, you expand who you are, and you actually become more interesting to people. You really do. And the last one is number 5, become comfortable with discomfort. Become comfortable being uncomfortable. Give yourself challenges to build your skills, build up your tolerance, build up your courage, build up your immunity to discomfort, to fear, to the lies, to the ideas that you have in your mind, which aren't necessarily true. Our behavior is driven by discomfort. We do, as human beings, whatever we can to avoid discomfort. So, what I'd like you to do is every once in a while, move toward it. Get out of that comfort zone, move toward the discomfort. Because at that place of discomfort is where you will grow. A couple of final statements. One, change the word no to not yet. Have you ever been to China? Your answer might be no. I'd like you to change that to not yet. Have you ever tried this type of food? Not no, not yet. Stop waiting for permission to act on your imagination. You don't need anyone's permission to decide to be creative today. You do not need anyone's permission to try something new. You do not need anyone's permission to drive a different way home, to shop at a different supermarket. Only you have to decide for yourself. Give yourself permission to try new things. Give yourself permission to fail. Give yourself permission to get rejected by people and things. It's okay. It's a learning experience. Being rejected simply means it wasn't in your destiny. It means nothing else beyond that. So if in your mind you have the idea that being rejected is something bad, change that perspective now. It's not true. To wrap up, I would like you to remember the words of Walt Disney. If you can dream it, you can do it. So I would like you to go forth, unleash your imagination, because it's there. Your ideas are there. You have not lost your creativity. You just haven't given yourself permission to go back and find it again. You know, if you loved this podcast, if you liked it, share it with a friend. Please write a review and reach out anytime. I would love to hear your feedback. Wishing you a beautiful Easter weekend ahead. I have 2 Easter weekends ahead, being Catholic, and the following one is Greek Orthodox. And I will see you again in a week. Bye for now.